We begin with this Conference League final. That scoreline, Andy, 4-1 to Chelsea. Did that reflect the game? I thought Betis were better than that.
It reflected the second half, and I think it reflected how out of puff Betis were by the end of it. I agree with you. I think it feels like poor reward for what they offered to the final, and a particularly good first half, of course. But I don't know about you guys. I felt watching it, when I was watching that really great first half performance and how Chelsea were kind of stuck in the starting blocks while Betis were flying out of them, I was just thinking there's no way that Betis can keep this up. And the question was how they were going to manage the second half. And I guess then we really saw the difference. I was saying this on Ramble Reacts with Pete last night. The fact that that Maresca used his changes very well, but he's able to make good changes because he's got a lot of strength on the bench. It's not really the same for Betis. I think they've come out of a tricky place financially, and I think as well as improving their self-image, this season is going to do a lot for them economically as well. Even if it's not quite a Champions League season, it's really going to do something for them. And I don't think they can have that many regrets, to be honest. I think they gave it absolutely everything they could. They made it a final which was competitive and enjoyable. And at the end of it, it just wasn't quite enough.
I half agree. I don't think I agree on the no regrets, just because I felt like I was with you in thinking as that first half went on, this isn't sustainable. There's too much being put into this. They're not going to be able to do this all through the second half. But I did feel like there was a moment at least when they could have expanded on that lead. And maybe if you get 2-0 up, then the situation starts to look different. And there was definitely a moment in that first half where it felt like it almost felt to me like the opposite. It felt like this is one of those magic things that happens in a final where Isco is just producing at this incredible level and orchestrating, and everything around him, the energy in the stadium, the people there for whom, without wanting to oversimplify, because of course it is oversimplifying, and I'm certain Chelsea loved the final, it just felt like it meant more to Betis in that moment. And Chelsea maybe looked like they weren't quite ready for how intense Betis were going to be, for how much they were going to bring. And there was some really nice football there for a little bit. And I think there was definitely a moment when, if Betis scored again, who knows how the rest of the final goes. Obviously, when they scored 4 in the second half, Chelsea, it looks different. But I thought there was a moment when they had Chelsea really on their heels.
Of course, there is always a slight tinge of regret when you lose, if not a massive tinge of regret when you lose, always. However, I take your point, Andy, that given that they've never been to this stage of a European tournament before, getting to the final, and given the season that they've had, this will seem as perhaps for Manuel Pellegrini not too bad a result.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you both touched on it, Dotun. We talked about it off air, and Nicky, you talked about it there about Isco. Really, in terms of them being at this stage of this sort of competition for the first time, making history by getting to the semi-final, then making history by getting to the final, so much of it was always going to land on Isco. And I think if you go back, and again, I was talking about this last night, if you go back to the 2017 final where Real Madrid win, and Isco is arguably their most important player that year. Now, look, I know that's a while ago now, and I think the athletic element plays into what happened or didn't happen last night, because there he's not just someone who can pick the lock, and even though you can say, like, for the Betis goal, Chelsea were a bit out of shape, it still takes a phenomenal pass from Isco to put in as Abde to finish the goal. And I think it was so important when you look at when he was a key player for Real Madrid, what he did defensively, how he was used by Zidane as this sort of defensive number 10, really. it was such an interesting role, and really leans into how good he is off the ball. Now, I guess as time goes by, you can't be quite as good off the ball now as you were in your mid-20s. I mean, that's normal. But I think that was really the key to the game. The fact that while Isco was running the game, it felt like all possibilities were open to Betis. And when he was no longer able to run the game, and I think that's really what we saw more than anything else in terms of a gap between the two teams, a physical gap, a power gap, that was when Chelsea really took control of it. So, as you say, Dotun, look, I think Betis have got a lot to be happy about once they get a bit of distance from the final. And I think that semi-final against Fiorentina just gave such a lot of value to the competition. It was a final that both teams played to the end, went to extra time in the second leg. They both desperately wanted to win. You had one devastated team who, like, I think probably was sitting there on the pitch at the Artemio Franchi thinking we deserve to be in the final. And you got another team celebrating wildly thinking, yes, we've finally done it. And that, I think, means so much when you look at the way that Chelsea were able to, and we'll go on, I suppose, to talk about the financial disparity between the best of the Premier League and the rest of the teams in the Conference League. But the way that Chelsea were able to cruise through this whole tournament, and when you got to the final, they were rocked, as Nicky said, and they were forced to really turn it up to get their own way.
There was something quite heartbreaking in that as well, though, Andy, because you said that semi-final was brilliant entertainment and spectacle, and then you have Marc Bartra at the end of the game saying, "Well, it seems like this season is worthless now," and you just think that's like a heartbreaking reality of football, isn't it? That you can go through all of that, you can have all this great stuff happen, and I think I disagree to call the whole season worthless, because really it has been this season in two parts for Betis, hasn't it? And I think that there's an opportunity now, at least, for them to take this second half of the season and use it as a launch pad towards something better again next season. Although there's lots of questions in that, right? For instance, pretty front and centre what happens with Anthony after this season.
Yeah.
But I also felt like that was such a I don't know, cut to the core of how cruel football can be as well, that you can go from this has been so incredible, what a journey, to, oh, and now it's all worthless in one, not even a game, in one 45-minute section of football.
I guess the thing about the season being worthless, like I said, with a bit of distance, I don't think they'll believe that, and I don't think that will prove to be the case. But, of course, when you're in a final, it does feel, and if you don't get it over the line, it does feel like it's a terrible missed opportunity, whatever the circumstances of losing that final are. And I think really part of it for Betis is the feeling that they've got, and I don't want to always bring it back to El Gran Derby, but you kind of have to. The fact is they've got an opportunity to make themselves the dominant team, the dominant club in Seville at the moment, because Sevilla are an absolute mess. So that is the thing, of course, that they've not managed to do. Like, Sevilla have become the club worldwide that is associated with this incredible football city, because they've won a European trophy again and again and again and again and again. You know, they've made the Europa League their own, and the Europa League will still be seen as Sevilla's trophy, whatever happens to them over the next couple of seasons, which I imagine mostly won't be good. And I think it was quite funny at the end, the first thing, and you knew it was going to happen, the touch paper lit by Sevilla putting out a tweet going, "Congratulations to our former player, Enzo Maresca, on his European trophy win," to which the Betis president immediately replied, "Congratulations to Sevilla for staying in the division this year." By 1 point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But I do feel that, I mean, obviously a lot of the gap between the two, which I do feel will accentuate, is due to the fact that Sevilla have been disastrously run, really, in recent years. But, you know, Betis haven't been in incredible financial health either. And I think if you look at what they've been able to do, and I guess we'll come to like the loan of Antony in a little bit. You know, that sort of doing smart transfers on the margins is super important. But the job that Manuel Pellegrini has done, when a lot of people might have wondered when he came back from English football, is he really done at this level? Is he done at like a top division level, or a good top division level? And he's come into this huge club, and they are now in a situation where they've qualified for Europe every single year since he's been there. Now, they didn't quite make the Champions League this season through the league. I think this kind of blew them off course a little bit, concentrating on this cup competition, and good for them for going for the cup rather than for the Champions League. But they're going to be in the Europa League next year, which is a step up. I think they can be one of the contenders, depending on what they're able to do or not able to do in this transfers market. And obviously, a big aim there will be to keep hold of Antony, even though he didn't have his best game in the final. And I don't think it can go unacknowledged against this backdrop of where they've been at financially. You know, good leadership is so important. And Sevilla are showing that at the moment because they're really lacking it. But Pellegrini has done an incredible job at Betis.
I'd like to just throw in an extra part of that, Andy, because I think leadership is so important, but I also think cohorts are so important. It's something that I think about in football quite a lot, because I've had this conversation with friends who are teachers about how much of a difference it can make in a classroom when you've got just like a certain core of kids who are pulling in the same direction and can lift a whole group up because they sort of set that tempo. And I was thinking about this again in relation to Antony and to Isco, who clearly have this bit of almost a bromance going on since they've been there. There've been all this sort of stuff on social media, Isco threatening to kidnap him, and so he can't leave and all this stuff. But Isco's someone who's gone through it, right? At 31 years old, he was out of football. He was completely without a club and not retired, but unemployed. And he's talked about that, and he's talked about going through the mental health stuff and coming out the other side of it. And I just wonder how much of a difference it makes at a point in your career like Antony's at, which is obviously a low point, to run into someone who's able to turn around and go, yeah, you know what, like there's another side to this. You can get out of it and look how much fun we can make football again. I think there's obviously a huge impact from the manager, but I do think that sort of thing, these are the stories that end up completely shifting the course of players' careers sometimes, is just finding a teammate who gets it and who can put them on a level that can help them move forward.
And if you're Pellegrini, do you keep Antony then? Do you get the club to buy him off Manchester United?
I don't think buying's really an option. I think, funnily enough, I think the way that this final went is medium term, like probably quite helpful to Betis. I don't think they're really going to have many competitors out there. I think for a lot of people who saw Antony last night, there will be a sort of bit of confirmation bias. You know, this fact that he's ripped it up in La Liga week after week, and he's been great in their Conference League campaign as well. But a lot of people who thought he's not of the level of Manchester United will have seen that performance last night and thought, yeah, that's just what I thought. Whereas actually, you know, there's a lot of reasons for why it didn't work for him last night. I think Cucurella played him a lot better than Malagusto played Ezabde in the first half. Isco used Ezabde more, I think, as well. But look, I think it probably meant too much to Antony as well. You know, it certainly felt like that at the back end of the game. But really, I think United are in a situation where he is very difficult to sell, especially when you bear in mind how much he cost in the first place. So to me, the logical conclusion is he probably gets loaned to Betis for another year. Now, if he has a great final and scores a couple, maybe they've got competition. I'm not convinced they will have now.